Hi, I'm meteorologist Pete Mangione. Welcome to another exciting edition of Sonoran Sky Live. Today, our topic will be weather and agriculture. And of course, there's a huge relationship between these two things. Of course, when you get things like floods, droughts, heat waves, cold snaps, those are all things that can damage crops. And when crops get damaged, that can affect things like the food supply. And when the food supply gets affected, that can affect markets and trading all over the world. So there's really a huge, strong tie-in between climate, weather, farms, and agriculture, and that's what we are going to talk about today. So I have two guests that will join us. Our first guest is Jenny Kofka. She works at Louis Dreyfus Company. Jenny, welcome to Sonoran Sky Live.
Hi, Pete. Thank you for having me.
All right, Jenny, so clearly you have passion for weather, agriculture, climate, and as a climate data scientist, can you just tell us how you get started with your career and how you ended up where you are right now?
Of course. Studied meteorology in undergrad, went on to get my doctorate in atmospheric science after that, and I've been working in the private sector ever since, doing a range of different tasks, all with a focus on weather or climate data. And then I found myself at Louis Dreyfus Company, where I am a meteorologist and a data scientist here.
Very cool. Okay, so sometimes in my job here in Arizona, I complain because I've got to forecast for such a big area. There's the valley, there's the mountains in Arizona. It seems such like a vast area to forecast for. Are you actually forecasting for the entire Earth? You have to see what's going on everywhere?
Short answer, yes. So at Louis Dreyfus Company, we are talking about agriculture on a global scale. So we're talking about crops being grown in the US, in Canada, in South America, in Europe, in Africa, Australia, basically every single continent. So I need to have, my scope is basically global weather, and it is a big undertaking, but thankfully crops kind of grow at different times of the year. So while North America and Europe are busy during parts of the year, South America and Australia get busy at other parts of the year.
And was that something that you kind of had to ramp up on? I mean, knowing the climate and weather for every single place on Earth, they may, right, if you get asked for a forecast in South America, you may actually have to research just what's the climate like, what's the terrain like?
I feel like I am constantly learning about weather globally in this role, but thankfully I also have a team of meteorologists here, so I have some help, and they are located in different parts of the globe as well.
All right, so I'm guessing, unlike my current position where we tend to do a 7-day forecast, some of your forecasts may have to go out a little further into the future than that, correct?
Yes. So when we're talking about crops and global agriculture, these are things that are grown over the course of many months. So I'm also looking at things like the subseasonal forecasts, which go out for the next 6 weeks, and also the seasonal forecasts, which are going out the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months in the future. And then at the same time, I'm also looking at various teleconnection signals like ENSO, so that's your La Nina or El Nino, the Indian Ocean Dipole, the MJO, North Atlantic Oscillation, PDO, et cetera, the alphabet soup of teleconnections. And I'm seeing how all of those align and impact the weather at different places around the globe.
Yeah, and as someone that's studied those briefly, I mean, there are so many teleconnections and weather patterns, kind of hard to keep track of sometimes. So what kind of crops do you look at? I mean, when I think of agriculture and things that drive markets around the world, I think of corn and soybeans. Are you doing that plus a bunch of other crops too?
Yeah, so corn, soy, those are two really big ones, but we're also monitoring weather conditions for wheat, for cotton, sugar, rice, palm, sunseed, many more.
Very cool. And, given that we're in the winter now, for like the United States, some people might think, well, there's not going to be much farming going on right now. But, I mean, winter wheat, that's an example of crops that do depend on weather in the winter, right?
Correct. Yeah, so I'm monitoring weather conditions over the U.S. with respect to winter wheat acreage. At the same time, we're also keeping close eye on weather conditions over South America, where they're in their peak growing season right now.
Oh, and I didn't even think of that. So basically, their season is the opposite. So that probably makes your job kind of confusing sometimes, right? You're forecasting for winter in some parts of the world, but then at the same time, you're forecasting for summer in other parts of the world.
Exactly. So I always need to remind myself to talk about summer down there, even though it's winter up here. can get confusing.
I'm sure it can. Is there any specific type of weather that can be especially harmful for crops? I mean, I know that floods, heat waves. Is there especially a bad kind of weather that people might not think of when you're looking for the health of crops in the future?
I mean, you definitely touched on some of them. So for sure, major flood events can be very damaging and devastating for certain crops, especially if they cannot endure long periods of time underwater. You have your major freeze events. So, for crops such as coffee, if they're in a flowering state and it freezes and those buds freeze and fall off, we lose a lot of the coffee acreage for that year. Also things such as heat waves. So during the summer months, if you have a really long duration heat wave event and it stresses out the crop, that can also severely impact the yield.
Is there an especially delicate kind of crop that is just very picky about the kind of weather that it likes?
I guess all crops have their own intricacies. Let's say if you're talking about the corn crop, for example, and you're in the middle of summer in the US and the corn is currently in a pollination phase, that is probably one of its most susceptible phases to heat stress. And if you don't have a good pollination, you're not going to have a good corn yield at the end. So I feel like most crops have windows of time during which they're super susceptible to damaging weather conditions.
So basically what you're saying is they're kind of like people. They can also complain about the weather and have their own personal preferences.
I suppose you're right.
All right, so how does your workday start? Are you just getting out the weather maps and looking at weather all over the world? You get out the coffee. Is that sort of what you do to start your day?
Pretty spot on there, except I start my day with a cup of tea. I open up all the various forecast models. I start my day looking at the short-term forecast. So, your ECMWF model, your GFS model. I'm, looking at everything from the point of view of how it impacts crop weather. So I know you're doing it with respect to the general population. I'm doing it with respect to the crops. Typically trying to see how did today's model run change compared to yesterday's model run, as a lot of the markets are tied to these intraday changes in those short-term models. And then at the same time, I'm keeping tabs on those teleconnection signals that I talked to you about, the subseasonal models. Are there any changes there that would indicate, maybe an upcoming drought that could potentially impact the crops, or a damaging heat wave, or a freeze event? And then I'm writing daily weather summaries that go out to people here. They get to read them. They get to then, take whatever position they want to take in the market. And then after I'm done with all of my operational meteorology work, I am also partly a data scientist. So that part of my day is fun. Get to go into the code, writing some predictive models, or maybe generating some new and interesting weather graphics and visualizations.
I'm glad you mentioned, Jenny, this thing about the forecast potentially affecting the markets because, and I'm just going to make up this scenario. Let's say that all the computer models are predicting a terrible heat wave in parts of the United States for the next several weeks. Can that forecast create movement in the market even if it doesn't end up being correct?
Oh, absolutely. The weather forecast models, especially the short-term models, it's a big driver of these markets when we're talking about commodities. So if you're in the middle of summer, and I mentioned corn pollination before. So if you're in the middle of summer and we know that corn is going to be pollinating over the next 2 weeks, and we see all the forecast models are showing this intense heat dome over the central US, I would probably say that the markets would go up, prices would rise, as this would indicate perhaps a poor yield. So even if it did not happen, if this event did not take place, markets would rise if all of those models showed a heat wave at the same time.
That is fascinating, which is why you pointed out that changes to the forecast, not changes in the actual weather, but changes in the forecast can be a huge driver.
Yes, exactly.
You also mentioned how it's almost like you wear two hats over there. You kind of look at the weather, think about the weather visually, but then you have the data analysis side where you're cranking out the code. Do you have an order in which you do that? Like, let's say you see in a couple weeks there might be an atmospheric river coming to the Central Valley of California, which will affect some of the crops there. Do you first kind of just think about that from a broader sense, and then once you have sort of your thoughts together, then you dig into maybe some of the coding and the data analysis?
Definitely start on the operational side, as I think that's kind of key for all the traders who work here. They want to see the big weather changes in the morning. So start there, and then in the freer part of my afternoon, that's when I'll then put on my coding hat, as I like to say. Perhaps I can create some interesting analysis for them.
And as part of your coding, do you try to actually like make a contest between the different weather models, try to figure out which weather models are doing better than others?
That's certainly something that we keep track of. It's also an important question to answer is, yeah, which models are, doing better or worse? And it changes different times of year and at different places around the globe, and it's constantly changing.
What are your thoughts on some of these new AI models? I think I've checked out a few of the European versions, and to me,
Mhm.
sometimes they look pretty good. Do you find that they help, they hurt, or sort of a mix of everything?
It's a tool that I've been using to look at. It's not something I'm heavily weighting at this moment. They're still relatively new. I've seen them do better in some situations, worse in others. So I think it's an important tool that companies they start monitoring to keep on top of the trends. But I would also not stop looking at your standard suite of forecast models either.
How often do your coworkers ask for personal forecasts? Nothing to do with your job. Hey, I got to drive to so and so today, and will it rain?
I've certainly had it happen a couple times, people asking for forecasts of what's the weather looking like this weekend? I have a wedding here, or what's the weather in this other part of the world? I have a vacation I'm going on. So I get that from time to time from my own friends as well. It's part of the fun of being
Well,
a meteorologist.
well, I hope you charge them a lot. That's what I do. Kidding, obviously. So when you kind of look at the world of weather and agriculture and the market, I mean, are there people that sit around and try to predict heat waves and cold snaps, and then they sit at their computers and try to make like stock trades based on that? Is that what people are doing?
I'm There are probably some people that are doing that. I'm not one of them, but I'm sure there are people that for fun they're keeping track of weather forecasts and maybe looking at weather derivatives market even.
How helpful or hurtful is social media with popularizing some of these weather terms that have actually been around forever, but people think that they're new, like bomb cyclone,
Mhm.
atmospheric river, things like that?
Even the polar vortex.
Polar vortex, yeah.
I think it would be a nice way to get people aware of these terms. Sometimes I think people, when they're talking about it, can maybe they make it seem a little bit too extreme. Obviously, these things have been around for a long time, like bomb cyclones, polar vortex, for example. But it's a nice way to teach people. And I mean, I myself, I'll look at Twitter, kind of see what the various weather people are saying on Twitter.
Well, Jenny Kofka, thank you so much for your time and being on Sonoran Sky Live. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been
All
a
right,
pleasure.
have a great day. All right, I think that was a very insightful, interesting conversation. We're going to now bring you a different perspective on all of this. We're actually going to talk to a former TV guy. His name is Matt Makens. He works at Makens Weather LLC. He did TV for a long, long time, including a stint in Denver, which I know because I used to watch him on TV. Matt, thanks so much for being part of Sonoran Sky Live.
Good to see you, Pete. Good to connect again, buddy.
For sure. All right, so can you briefly walk through your weather career and how you ended up where you are now?
Well, I grew up in agriculture. My dad was a veterinarian, large and small animals, so I was used to that world. Weather was always my jam, though. I mean, since I was tiny, I had to be outside. I don't like being indoors, and I'm always, what's that cloud mean? What's this hail mean? All those things. So went to University of Kansas, got my degree, started in air pollution meteorology, the modeling of the air quality from coal-fired power plants. That's where I started. That kind of fit my brain of the modeling side, the physics side, which I really enjoy. And then that industry was shut down largely. So that job turned into, boy, I got to pay some bills. What am I going to do? And I had interned in some television stations and radio and got back into that. And 20 years later, I was still doing it. 10-year stint in Denver. I was in Orlando, Wichita, Lawrence, Kansas City, Topeka, those areas. And then right toward the tail end of the COVID pandemic, I said, there's an opportunity here to be using the communication side with my physics and atmospheric science side and help an industry that really needs a better communication outlet. And that started again about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been here ever since. So that's the long story short. Did I bore you?
No, not at all. I find it fascinating. And I mean, judging by the name of your company, this is your company. Are you CEO, president, founder? Are you your own boss?
I'm everything. I am everything. I have people that help out, especially this time of the year. There's some coding projects that I just don't have the time to dedicate to. It's also a busy snow season. Some snow contractors and things that really get and need information all times a day. So I have people helping with that. But so it's really the company's a lot. There's the ag side, which is largely beef cattle. There's some row crop in there. There's some molasses out of Australia in there, and then we go all the way down to golf courses and snow removal companies, maintenance companies, that kind of thing. So there's a lot going on, a lot to keep track of, and there are busy days for sure.
And getting to the agriculture, I was browsing your website and I noticed one of the services you offer, forage and grazing planning. Now, I'm guessing you're not talking about, the person that gets up in the middle of the night and is looking for a midnight snack. You're talking about livestock, right? And how it relates to the weather?
That's true. My forage plan is that midnight snack of tortilla
Right.
chips. You're right. Um, it is a very long-term plan. And within the ag industry, there are a lot of insurance products, and maybe those insurance products would cover you for 3 months or 6 months. Some go out a full year, and the deadline on some of those products is, December before that following year. So you're trying to help folks mitigate drought primarily for their operations, whether they be in cereal grains or they're a cow calf operator. They're worried about grass, those kinds of things. And yeah, we help plan for out to a year in advance and where they should probably place some insurance coverages, which months may be more beneficial for them. So it definitely goes out very long term. We're at the longest ranges are 12 to 18 months that we talk about in the future. So it's a lot to wrap your head around.
And Matt, if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're saying is that, hey, if there's a really bad drought, it's going to be harder to grow the food that the livestock depend on. Is that the right idea?
That's right. So then the insurance comes into play to offset the losses due to that drought for that operator, no matter what they're doing. So there are those products out there. That's right. And it helps offset for that producer the drought impact that hit them.
Well, these sound like pretty complex forecasts. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find it challenging to sometimes do a 7-day forecast, let alone months into the future.
Yeah, I think go back to the TV days, and we used to really painfully go through day 1 through day 7, right?
Yep.
And now it's a little bit easier. Modeling's faster, and everybody's basically given the same forecast or close anyway. But when you take that same level of detail and try to go out to next January, January 2027, and you're still trying to go through it with that fine tooth comb, there is a lot to pull your hair out with. And I would say that, television had it was a wonderful industry and I really enjoyed it. There were stresses there. I would say the stresses are much different on this side of the industry because you're dealing with people directly, face to face, and you're helping them their bottom line. It's not like you're canceling a park date on Saturday.
Right.
You're helping their operation, which can be huge. Hundreds of thousands of cattle, for an example, or hundreds of millions worth of molasses products. So the stress level is definitely much higher.
It sounds like, you know what, Matt? I'm never going to complain ever again about stressing out about day 4 of a forecast where it might rain based on some of the stresses that you have to deal with.
Well, you and I are very similar in that regard. We're going to stress out about a weather forecast no matter if we made it for next hour. That's just the weather nut inside of us. But yeah, it's definitely a different world when I talk to buddies and friends from the TV business and how that industry has changed in some stressful ways. And they're always curious my stress level and how it's changed in different ways too.
For sure. I'm curious. It sounds like you have some customers that are kind of all over the world. We're based here in Phoenix, Arizona. Have you ever had a customer in Arizona?
I do. Yep. There are some mostly ranchers down there, and there's some water interests as well, but mostly ranchers there that would operate cattle mostly in the growing season. So, typically around Arizona, we really worry about the monsoon. Is it going to be strong? Is it going to be weak? In there are some parasites that are growing within the news media. They're called, well, it's a fly. It's called screwworm. That's really been the top of interest for the last several months because they may move in from Mexico, and that's driven by the monsoon. So yeah, for Arizona, there's a lot of interest. Most of it does come from beef cattle producers there in Arizona to New Mexico, down into Mexico.
That's interesting because, as we know, that monsoon can be so tricky to try to predict.
It is. And, go back to your last guest that she was talking about all the teleconnections, and you try to wrap your head around, yeah, we look at all these teleconnections and ocean conditions and constantly rerun programming to find better correlations of why did the forecast for the monsoon last year, why was it weaker? Or in this last year's case, was it so delayed and why did it continue into September and some surges, into early October? So we're constantly reassessing in order to assess. It gets into this big wheel, it really gets thick into the weeds. But you're right. It's the monsoon is a tricky one, especially for this upcoming year as we transition likely to an El Nino. How rapidly that happens can have an impact on that monsoonal flow for whether it arrives in late May or June, or does it hold off like this last year. It's an interesting puzzle.
For sure. And, we are off to a very slow start here in Arizona, similar to Colorado for snowpack. Does that affect any of your customers that are, interested in the current level of the snowpack?
It does, especially the snow removal companies, because they try to plan out, staffing. Maybe they have contractors that are really doing the snow removal. Well, they're paying them, and then there's no snow. And around Colorado, we had record heat throughout all of December. It's currently Denver's sixth least snowy season on record since 1882. We're tracking that same system that's about to get you guys spread some of that water in over the next few days. That's going to try to give Denver its third snowfall of the season, one of the snowiest cities in the country, in the world. And we're talking about our third snow event in January. That's problematic. So yeah, when you look at the snow removal guys, they budgeted a lot to remove snow, and if they're not, there's obviously a stressful impactor there. And on the other side, there's some golf course interest that they're happy with it. They're People are on the courses more, not the water perspective, but that they're having players play. So it is interesting. You gotta definitely check your list and be like, who am I talking to now? Okay, let me frame my perspective so I'm not not insulting them, but are there interest in snow or not having snow? So you got to always kind of couch and frame depending on the client you're chatting with.
For sure. And I was also reading on your website about how you work with PRF and AF rainfall insurance. I mean, is this basically like, hey, if I don't get a certain amount of rain at my farm, then the insurance has to pay me something because I'm going to suffer losses?
Yes. So you take the network of rain gauges across the U.S. Canada has some similar products, but you take the rain gauges across the U.S. You in you factor in, okay, did those rain gauges hit their average, below average, or above average since 1948, their historical record, and you base payouts in that insurance if they were far less than their average amount. And that is a product that goes back to what we chatted about a couple minutes ago, that some of those policies, they have to sign them. A producer would have to sign them with their agent, say by December 1st, and you're betting on every month of the following year. But it's a rainfall gauged based practice. Did I get surplus of water? Did I get a deficit of water? And then I'll get a payout if I'm in a deficit.
And you and I have talked over the years. We've both been interested in coding and different side projects that we've worked on. Do you do a lot of coding still in your job? Automate, rainfall gauges, weather models, and things like that?
I use it to a tremendous amount. As you know, weather data is massive. The amount of it and how different entities code it differently, like the data set that the federal government uses, call it NDFD. That's in certain formats, decode it to match some other format, or historical rainfall data, historical temperature data, historical solar data. Coding really helps a tremendous amount. I can get data results much faster based on certain coding. But I always have ideas of why did a forecast, A, did it pan out? And B, if it didn't pan out, what was the main factor? And things like AI and coding and data analysis have really ramped up the effort to quickly determine maybe the correlations were different this time because of X, Y, or Z. And really, to me, it's helpful to accumulate data, use that data, but it's also very helpful in the verification of forecasts. And that's primarily where my coding comes in. It's a little on the data side, but mostly on the how do we improve the forecast process. So it is in a way uh, modeling in and of itself, and that's encouraging for me to see some of these AI tools coming out.
That's awesome. I'm a weather nerd, a coding nerd. I love digging through the data myself. Even though today's topic is mainly weather and agriculture, I heard you mention golf courses a few times. We have a lot of them here in Arizona. We have a big event, TPC Open, coming up in a few weeks. What kind of work do you do with golf courses and weather?
It goes anything from the standard of give me a 7-day forecast for temperatures, evapotranspiration rates. Some specifically in Colorado get very cautious about freeze events, frost events, especially frost early in the shoulder season. So through spring and fall, frost can be hugely detrimental to how they care for the grasses, all the trees, all the plants around the course. So frost is a big one. And when you tie in, since we're kind of chatting about the data side, frost is a fickle thing to forecast. It's very difficult. It depends on uh, how much cloud cover, how much particulate is in the air, whether it be pollution, is the wind calm, all of these factors. So some of the golf courses that are kind of the more intricate ones that go above the basics, they're the ones that want the frost forecasts, and those are constantly bias corrected machine learning type forecasts. And that's kind of the more interesting side of the golf courses, since you brought it up, is kind of that frost impact.
And if the weather is predicted correctly, could it fix my hook or my slice that I tend to suffer with on the golf course?
Well, in my years of studies, nothing helps my golf game. So I pretty much say I'm not a golfer. I'll go golfing, but I am not a golfer. And
That's
nothing I have programmed has ever helped me.
That's a very good way to put it. I noticed on your website you have actually a lot of videos explaining weather and agriculture and the relationship, and it almost looks like something you'd see on TV. So it looks like you are still using those TV skills to this day.
Very much home studio. We built during COVID because of the necessities of working from home. Kept it, and yes, still do a lot of video work, and that's primarily kind of the biggest thing that I focus on is knowing that weather people, we're nerds, okay? And sometimes for some of us, it's very difficult to communicate weather risks and assessments and potentials probabilities to an end user. And that's what kind of we focus on is how do we the data is the data, right? We can do our forecast be more accurate than somebody, but it's really more how you communicate this. And a lot of folks love video, so I still do videos. A lot of folks love written, so I'll write, which is something you don't do in TV. A lot of folks just want to get on the phone and you walk through a chart with them or something. So it definitely is still focused on kind of the production quality of television for the videos, but just bottom line is improve the communication to give folks the data and let them understand it. That's primarily what is being focused on.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating, and hopefully we'll connect again in the future. But thanks so much for being on Sonoran Sky Live.
My pleasure. I should come down and warm up. We're about to cool off up here.
Come on down. You're always welcome.
All right. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Matt. All right, that is it for today's show. A reminder, we're going to have another streaming episode at 1 p.m., and we're going to be focusing on our first alert for Wednesday and Thursday. It looks like we may have some rain coming to the valley, snow coming to the mountains, so you want to tune in. And the advantage of streaming, as you can see, we get extra time to really go through the analysis and discussions of all the uncertainty that we're facing when looking at the weather forecast. We'll see you next time on Sonoran Sky Live.